So let's talk about the we done with the 90s situation. We done with the 90s was this trend that started that where people are saying we're done with the 90s, and it became a huge thing. It's we done with the 90s, we done with the 90s because people just want to act like the 90s were trash basketball, and they use old clips to prove these things. Now, there's three levels to this argument. First, we done with the 90s. It is true that when you go back and look at the film, the 80s and 90s were not nearly as competitive or as good of a game as they were today. With that being said, they were also really capped off. They did not have the same level of motion and reach that players these days have. Because before, travels were called, double dribbles were called, and even something like a hezi. And I credit a lot of the information to videos online, but even something like a hezi was something crazy that people looked at as a double dribble, right? So it's like you look at the way that the game was played before, and a lot of the reasons why these people played the way that they did was because their games had to be fundamentally sound. And the reason why was because of the offensive limitations. Magic Johnson could not go and do the crossover that Paul George does today and not see the fans tell him that it was a double dribble and not see the league and the refs honestly go and call these fouls. Now, with that being said, their game became very different because we saw this very clear incline of players just passing it to each other for a lot of offensive possessions just to be able to get the ball into the hoop. And this was a lot of the reason why before they used to not score as many points, and the reason why before they used to prioritize more defense over offense. It was because offense was really second. Offense was bad, and you needed a superstar to really carry your offense because role players couldn't really play the way that a superstar would. So when you saw a guy like Magic, which had this really stiff up and down dribble, or Bird, which took not many dribbles before getting into a shot, or you saw like a point guard like Stockton, which would literally go and take two dribbles, pass it to Karl Malone, because they didn't want to dribble much because they did not have the ability of moves or the full range of moves that now players have, right? The reason why a lot of the players now can thrive is because they can put their hand under the ball. They can put their, feet, and they can take more steps, and they can have these limitations removed, which before these were things that were normal. Like you did not see before a player put his hand under the ball because that was a double dribble, that was a carry, and people would go and call these things always. Refs, on the other hand, used to call these things as well. And on defense, they would let guys actually beat each other up. Yes, they were also having trouble with league expansion, and basketball as a whole wasn't a real defined sport as the superstars of the time were just birthing, right? But we do have to say that when it comes to the game that's being played right now, it is a way better product in terms of skill because players get to do more with the ball, they get to have more freedom, and also in total, they get to have way more control over how games play out due to the fact that they don't have to worry about them taking 14 dribbles with their hand under the ball because the refs are not going to call that. The second aspect of this we done with the 90s thing is the retrospection aspect. And I mean that because in the future, if you say we done with the 90s, basketball and every sport really is an ever changing sport. Unless it's something like baseball that's been around forever, since before and after World Wars, I don't think baseball is changing. And even if you want to make that argument, I think that there are very few sports which can conceive to no change, right? Because they've already been fully defined and tested every single way to play the sport. With basketball, that's not the case. Basketball is an ever expanding product. The league is still figuring out how to balance offensive and defensive rules to make sure that the offensive players can have their freedom. Meanwhile, the defensive players can actually play defense. You know, after the All-Star break, we've seen these lower scoring games because defense is actually being pushed now, and it looks like a way better product after the All-Star break. And these are adjustments which are being made on the fly by the NBA to make sure that the product is the best that it can be. Now, what we also have to say about this is like, okay, so basketball is an expanding product. So if we done with the 90s in the 2020s, does that mean that in like 2060, right, or in like 2050, or in maybe a few years when maybe there are more superstars now, when we see guys with higher bags, higher skill sets, higher moves, are we gonna be done with the 2020s? Because look, the 2020s, if we're being honest, are a particular style of basketball. They look nothing like the 90s in terms of the rule book, right? And not even like the 2010s, where the 2010s was where the revolution came, when Steph Curry and the league started shooting that many threes, and the Golden State Warriors and LeBron back to the basket, you know, and all that, and the way that it became either the Steph Curry three or the LeBron James drive to the basket. If not, then don't do anything else. The mid-ranger was removed. When we saw the revolution in those four straight finals of LeBron and the Warriors, and we saw the difference between the three-point system and the go to the basket, get easy layup system, then we could honestly see that the league changed it in 2020 forward. Especially in the most recent years, we've seen this clear incline to offense pushed by the league because they thought that they would be able to market their stars better if their stars could play great offense. Obviously, this has not worked, as offensively, no one wants to see these games, and we've seen viewership numbers drop because they can't keep good statistics up, or they can't keep good performances up without scoring 150 points. And nobody wants to see a game that goes to 175 points per team. And that's just the truth. So in a few years, in maybe 20 to 30 years, will they be saying the same about the NBA now? Will they be saying, let's say defense gets better, will they be saying that the defensively they can't, play defense, or they couldn't play defense in the modern era? And these are questions which we have to ask ourselves, because it's like, okay, you might say we done with the 90s, but when someone says we done with the 20s, we're not going to react very kindly to that. And that's why I feel like we have to put respect in the past. Look, an era is an era. And just like the greats before Michael Jordan, before LeBron, before Steph, before Magic, before Bill Russell, we have to put respect on every era the way they were supposed to. By era, I mean that we're starting when black players could play in the NBA. And the reason why I say that is because obviously the NBA before then, half of its population, or at least a big part of the people who play, weren't there. Now, when we look at the eras, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, the 2010s, and now the 2020s, I believe that we have to be respectful to every era, just to not be disrespectful. Like the 90s were their own era, the 2000s were their own era. Michael Jordan was the best player And it doesn't matter what you saw in the video clip, he is Michael Jordan. And that's what is why I believe that we need to respect every era individually, not just have these big, like, oh, throw out the 90s, throw out the 2000s. Like, there needs to be an equilibrium of eras in this sport.